Ever wonder why some countries are incredibly rich while others seem to be trapped in a cycle of poverty? It's one of the biggest questions that defines our world today. So we're going to pull back the curtain on the historical systems and modern forces that created this massive global divide. Let's dive in.
I'm willing to bet you've used that phrase before. You know, we throw around terms like first world problem or third world country all the time. But have you ever stopped to think about where they actually came from? The answer might really surprise you, and it's our first clue in this whole story.
You see, this global layering has an official name: global stratification. The easiest way to think about it is like a giant pyramid, but for the entire planet. It's basically how social scientists talk about the huge inequalities in wealth, power, and prestige that sorts countries into different tiers.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at an old Cold War map that totally shaped how we talk about the world. Then, we'll see how that idea evolved into an economic model. After that, we'll get to the really juicy stuff, the big theories explaining why this inequality even exists. And finally, we'll see how these divisions are kept in place today.
All right, so our first stop is a trip back to the 20th century. Because the very first attempt to map the world like this wasn't about money at all. It was all about politics. It was about picking a side in a huge global standoff.
Yeah, back in the Cold War, the world was basically split into three teams. You had the First World, which was the United States and its capitalist allies. Then there was the Second World, the Communist bloc, led by the Soviet Union. And the Third World? Well, that was pretty much everyone else, all the nations that tried to stay neutral.
And this map right here shows you exactly what that looked like. Blue for Team Capitalist, red for Team Communist, and green for the non-aligned nations. Now notice, this is a map of political friendships, not bank accounts. And that is so important, because it's completely different from how we use the term Third World today to mean poor.
But then, around 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and just like that, this map was totally obsolete. The Second World practically vanished overnight. This forced everyone to come up with a whole new way to look at the world, one that was based on economics, not who you were allied with.
And that brings us to the next attempt, which shifted the focus from politics to economics. The big question wasn't whose side are you on anymore. Now it was, how industrialized are you?
So this new model also split the world into three groups. You had the most industrialized nations, the big economic powerhouses. Then you had the industrializing nations, which included a lot of those former Soviet countries trying to catch up. And finally, the least industrialized nations, mostly agricultural societies where most of the world's population still lives.
But, you know, this model started to show some major cracks too. I mean, what do you do with super rich oil-producing countries that aren't really industrial? Or what about modern economies that are all about tech and services, not factories? The boxes just didn't fit anymore, which proves that simply slapping labels on countries isn't enough. You have to understand the system creating the inequality.
Okay, so this is where we really get to the heart of it. We're moving past the what and into the why. Why do these divisions exist in the first place? Well, there are two major theories that try to explain the root causes of it all.
The first theory points a finger directly at colonialism. The argument goes that the world's wealthiest nations didn't just get rich by accident. They got a massive head start by conquering other lands and basically draining them of their resources, their labor, and their wealth. This created a global pecking order from day one, with the colonizers at the top and the colonized at the bottom.
Now, a second, really influential idea is called world system theory. This theory suggests that industrialization didn't just happen in a few countries here and there. It created one single interconnected global capitalist economy. And inside this giant system, every country was sort of assigned a role to play.
So at the center of it all, you have the core nations. These are the countries that industrialized first, like Great Britain or the US. They became the rich, powerful bosses of the whole system.
Then, way out on the edges, you have the periphery nations. Their economies were pretty much built to serve the core, often by selling just one or two things, like sugar or rubber. This relationship made them incredibly dependent on the core nations for their survival.
And sitting right in the middle, you have these semi-periphery nations. Think of them as the middle managers of the global economy. They have more economic clout than the periphery, but way less than the core. And they act as a kind of buffer between the two.
Okay, so that's the history. But how does this system, with roots that go back centuries, still run the show today? Well, the methods have definitely gotten more sophisticated, but that core imbalance is still with us.
One of the key forces is something called neocolonialism. See, after World War II, old-school military colonialism just wasn't cool anymore. So the powerful nations adapted. Instead of controlling countries with armies, they now use things like international markets and massive debt to keep their economic grip.
And another huge piece of the puzzle is the power of multinational corporations. These giant companies will often set up shop in lower-income countries for cheap labor. But here's the kicker. The vast majority of the profits they make don't stay there. They get funneled right back to headquarters, which are almost always in those core nations.
And if you want to see what all this looks like in the real world, well, this is it. This map shows GDP per capita, which is basically a measure of average wealth. And the pattern is it's undeniable. The wealthiest spots in dark green are those historic core nations, and the least wealthy, in yellow, line up with the periphery.
And look, this isn't just about numbers on a map. This has massive human consequences. This chart shows you exactly how that economic reality translates into poverty. You can see how countries like Chad have these incredibly high poverty rates, while nations that have industrialized more, like Brazil and China, have seen their poverty rates drop like a rock.
But, and this is so important, it's not all doom and gloom. Not at all. This graph shows the global rate of extreme poverty since 1990, and the trend is crystal clear. It is falling fast. We've actually made some incredible progress, and while there's still a long road ahead, the trend is heading in the right direction.
So this leaves us with this huge, lingering question for the future. As technology and globalization keep changing everything, is this system that's been around for centuries finally breaking down, or is it just shape-shifting into something new? And that, really, is the challenge for all of us now. To understand this system and to figure out what comes next.